Hi guys. Thank you for watching my series so far. It seems to have really been quite a big hit with people, which is just amazing. Thank you for spending your time watching that. Um, I am going to be going into the SAG-AFTRA membership rules, which is obviously the Actors Guild. What I wanted to just clarify very quickly, though, if I may, before we do that, I've had a couple of people sort of say to me, Leanne, um, Reddit have done a bit of a deep dive on the PGA rule application. Blake used the one that was, obviously she applied for her PGA in, I'm pretty sure it's June. I want to say June 2024, June or July. And then they say the PGA rules were then updated after she applied. They want to know because obviously the rules I'm using are actually the current rules because there are no kind of rules from other years available in terms of the eligibility. And I need to make the distinction as well that the PGA is not like your typical union. It's not like the WGA, the DGA, or SAG-AFTRA. It does not, have any enforcement in particular. It doesn't confer rights, or it doesn't do anything like arbitration, nothing like that. What it does is it looks at an application for a PGA mark. It says, yes, you're entitled to this, or no, you're not. And then at some point, if they need to relook at that mark and, decide to rescind it, make a decision on whether to rescind the mark or not, they can do that too. Other than that, there's not much else to the PGA. So I could only be looking at, Blake Lively's application, and then, looking again at the application with what we know today, should she keep her mark? And the latter, the should she keep her mark part was more of my focus. So, how have the rules changed? There have been some changes, largely in terms of preventing producing credits being used as vanity credits. So, people who have not done work really should not be getting producer credits. And that does include people who have donated in some way or crowdfunded. Um, it would include Steve Sourwitz, who did get I believe he got an executive producer credit. And what did he do for the film? Well, yes, he paid for the film to be made, which is incredibly important. I'm absolutely not dismissing that at all. And should he have got an executive producer credit? I think so. Yeah, to a point. I can see why. But some people, Steve Sourwitz did not do this. Some people were then using that to then go and apply for a PGA mark. And what the PGA have said is if you, get a producer credit or an executive producer credit, and it's largely vanity, your contribution is more financial and you haven't actually done any of the hands-on producing work, then we are not going to consider this for a PGA mark. Steve Sourwitz did not apply for the PGA mark, so it does not really apply to him. But there was I think there was a long recognized problem with people applying for PGA marks who had not actually done any of the physical kind of grift to, actually earn it. And it is something that needs to be earned, not bought, not, given to mates, etc., etc. And that's what it was. That's the biggest change. The other thing that changed quite significantly was the they added additional production formats. So productions such as animation, documentary films, immersive films, etc., etc. These were all categories where people could work on them previously. as producers, and they were not eligible to apply for the PGA. Now it's actually been opened up to these production formats, which is good, which is a good thing. And then there was some dual roles, more specifically, writers and directors who were also had the role of producer, so they were serving in dual capacity. In particular with directors, but although it is difficult with writers too, but in particular with directors, it is hard to pass out the difference in whether you've got your director's hat on or your producer hat on. And when you're doing the two together, it was always been quite hard to evidence um how for a person who was a director, it's been hard for them to evidence the elements of the work that actually would count towards the PGA mark. So the PGA made the guidelines basically for, you know, how to evidence that. They kind of provided a matrix. That did include the actor producer role, which I did look at and which I did sort of say, oh, Lively needs this and Lively needs that. And yes, that does apply to right now. But it would still apply. It wouldn't make any difference to what I've said about Lively. The reason being is look at her PGA letter. I didn't need a matrix to say, okay, just taking on value. Imagine that you're in the PGA and you're looking at Blake Lively, her PGA letter with all the list of things that she says she's done, the 18, 19 letters that have followed as well from all the various department heads saying, yeah, she did all this. They're not looking at anything else beyond that. And at the time, like us, they were not aware of what was really going on behind the scenes. So if you're just looking at Blake Lively's long list of all the things she's done, you've got no idea what's going on in the background. You've got all the department heads also saying, yeah, no, she did, she did all this. She got the author of the book saying, yeah, she did this. You got two Sony representatives saying, yes, she did this. And then they did get a letter from Wayfarer as well, also saying, yes, she should have this mark. That's all that poor person is looking at. So we didn't need the matrix then to say, well, was she eligible? She did everything according to her PGA and then had a bunch of letters to back it up. But yes, some of the eligibility rules did change. They did tighten up. They didn't make blind bit of difference for what I was doing anyway, because the focus of my video really was, she got the award, fine. Now we've had all the stuff unsealed. Should she still have the award? Should it be rescinded? What does the PGA say? And the stance of the PGA is, it doesn't matter what changes happened, last year or the year before. The most important thing is, there has never been a rule which would allow anyone to manipulate their way into producing duties to then send off and say, here, I want to now claim the PGA. There has never been a rule which would have allowed Blake Lively to misrepresent her role or coerce people to write letters. That's never been there. But the PGA eligibility criteria, the wording is so specific that, we may revoke this, we may rescind this award if it turns out that you have misrepresented this, and this. And that was the focus of what I was looking at, because we've now got all these text messages from Sony, from WME. We've got deposition transcript. Were you ever threatened? Did you feel extorted? You got text messages, saying, where we literally saw how she got her cut, despite listening to Blake Lively say, oh, it's Sony's cut. Sony asked me to do it. We actually saw the text messages between two Sony executives categorically saying, no, she's made this allegation against Josh and now she wants her own cut. She's demanding it. We now know the truth. So the point of my video was just to go and look at her award and say, should she have it today? Should it be taken off her? And the answer is yes. So the updates, whilst there are updates, yes, and I do acknowledge that, they don't make any material change to my opinion and, the points I was making in my video. So I want to start by just clarifying that. But yes, the people on Reddit who did some, and did some investigation. Yeah, they did a great job, and yes, there was changes made, very good changes and positive ones. But it would not have stopped get Lively getting the PGA mark at the time, and it does not add or take anything away from the fact that she should have it rescinded now, as we sit here today, with all the evidence that we have. So, what I will do is the one thing I was hoping to not do, but what I will do is I will do a point by point video where I go through each thing that she said she claimed she did, and I will line up the evidence for why it was not something she was asked to do. The very first one is I changed the location of the shoot to, save money and costs and all. No, you didn't. She didn't. We've seen it. We now know that that was for her convenience. She wasn't asked to do that. She didn't want to travel. It was all set and lined up for Boston. But she wanted the location changed to New Jersey because it's, so close to her own home. That's all that was. That is not producing, because it's not for the benefit of the movie or for the cast or crew. It was for her sole benefit. So I will go through each point one by one in a separate video, which will take me some time. So that's not going to be coming anytime soon. But whilst this kind of break we're having from filings being, thrown at the docket is kind of still ongoing, I will just get through as much as I can. But we'll go back to we're here today for SAG-AFTRA. This is important. It's important because we need to remember, again, there's so much overlap. There have been people who are in multiple roles who are under multiple guilds. Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively, along with many other cast members, actually, are SAG-AFTRA members. And what I want to do today is look and say, okay, Justin Baldoni, in his capacity as an actor, did any of Blake Lively's conduct towards him violate membership rules for SAG-AFTRA? And the answer is going to be yes. Again. And as I said, I have got like a whole PowerPoint put together where I will bring the 3 guilds together. I'm not doing the Writers Guild because that's specific to Ryan Reynolds, but I am doing the Producers Guild, the Directors Guild, and SAG-AFTRA. And then I'm looking at all the various violations Blake Lively kind of, caused because of her conduct, and what sanctions or remedies can be sought, how it can be put right. Okay. So, the first rule violation, if we just go to 2A. It shall be the duty of every member to fully comply with workplace safety protocols approved by SAG-AFTRA. Okay. Why does that apply? Why is that important? Well, we need to remember, right, that actors and actresses are not just kind of working in that role, like for the actual photography side of things when the film is being shot. When the shooting finishes, that's not the end of their role. It is all the pre-production stuff, rehearsals, everything, going through any scripts, hair, makeup, everything from the start when they sign on until the end of the promotion, after the film. There is duties and rights and responsibilities. And I'm largely using the First Amendment complaint and the timeline for this, but we have also got, we've seen other emails and heard deposition transcripts. So there is a lot of evidence. Um, I'm not going to hone in on every single thing that she did to potentially violate a particular rule. I'm just picking one or two examples. Um, just to highlight that, given, this is how I think for this, she violated this rule. And so far, we have looked largely at the actual production and the post production, i.e., the edit of the film for other Guild videos. This one, I'm looking at the premiere. And Lively, she had Baldoni kind of, isolated from the cast. She had him escorted off the red carpet, because there is mention of all of this. She had him, and his family and, not just Baldoni, but all the representatives. She had them all escorted to a basement, and she had him excluded from an after party, thereby creating unsafe, unpredictable, humiliating conditions for a fellow performer at the premiere, which is a union-covered event. Effectively, this creates a hostile, unsafe environment, and it's really important to clarify that when we say unsafe, it does not mean literally, like, oh, well, they could hurt themselves, fall over and hurt themselves. It is, like in the same way that Lively is referring to Baldoni creating an unsafe set environment through words, through actions. Lively is doing the same by excluding someone, humiliating them, you know, um, making them have second rate or even third rate treatment, having to go and sit in a basement. Um, that is hostile and unsafe. Okay. Um, so yeah, I mean, actions like this violate the duty to comply with safety protocols, which include non-humiliating, non-retaliatory, and safe conditions for all performers. Okay, and then we have 2B. There is a duty to report violations. It shall be the duty of every member to report to the union any violation by a signatory of any of the union's collective bargaining agreements as the same now exist or may hereafter be amended. So what does that mean? Well, this so Lively's conduct triggered this duty for Baldoni, but the violation itself is not hers. And this rule is relevant because Baldoni's reporting a misconduct when he is saying to Sony, or he's trying to say to Lively, or he's trying to say to his talent agency, she's excluding me, she's bullying me, etc., etc. I'm not happy. When he's expressing that he's not happy with her actions, he's effectively same as Lively, I guess, when she reported, I'm not happy with being called sexy. I'm not happy with being shown a birth video. The reporting of the misconduct is protected activity. So Lively has helpfully kind of laid this foundation by saying, well, look, I said I wasn't happy, I was uncomfortable. I mentioned it to Sony and they didn't do anything with it. And technically, they should have done something with it. Lively's right. So, and that works in the same for Baldoni as well, where he is saying, "Look, I'm not happy. I'm being treated terribly. I'm being excluded." Um, that reporting of that misconduct is a protected activity, which then infers obligations then on people like Sony representatives. And the retaliation for, reporting is a Rule 7 violation. So if we go to Rule 7, let's just minimize that a little bit. There we go. No member shall engage in abusive conduct toward any other person, including but not limited to the following prohibited conduct. Now, it does say sexual harassment or sexually abusive conduct of any kind, including discriminatory conduct or retaliation for any bona fide report of such conduct. Right? And that's key. Although it says specifically sexual harassment or sexually abusive conduct of any kind, the top line says no member shall engage in abusive conduct toward any other person, including but not limited to. So it's not just sexual harassment. It can be any kind of conduct. You cannot be abusive to someone. And I do think there's discrimination. I think discrimination happened as well towards Justin Baldoni. Um, Actually, let's go and look at that. So one of the things Lively put in her 17-point list of demands was, no talking about sex life, right? By any, to any cast member, by any cast member, so on and so forth, right? And you got this text exchange between her and Jenny Slate. This is back in May 2023, and they're talking about the Airbnb. And, they're clearly talking about sex lives and how difficult it is to have sex when your child sleeps in the bed. And Jenny Slate is complaining that, well, the Airbnb they've given us doesn't allow us to have sex. And Blake Lively is like kind of empathizing and, oh, yeah, my kids sleep in the bed with me, that kind of thing. But what they're also talking about is, let me just move this up. What they are talking about here specifically is a conversation they had at work, basically. I don't know if it was on set or if it was, but basically they were with Justin Baldoni, and they'd had a conversation about how difficult it is for Jenny Slate to have sex in this B&B, Airbnb, because, her child's in the bed with them. And, I think Justin Baldoni had made something like, oh yeah, made a comment, said, oh yeah, it's terrible for sex. In fact, he did, because that is, next line down. But Blake Lively here on this top paragraph says, oh no, it's fine for you to say it. It's fine for me and you to talk about it because we're women. There's a safety in it. There's a safety with women that isn't there with men. The dynamics are different with men and women. It's either on the table as a topic of discussion, or it's not. And if you're saying that Justin Baldoni cannot talk about it because he's a man, he cannot participate in a conversation you are having in his presence, you have chosen to have that conversation in his presence, and you're now saying, well, if you say something, Jenny Slate, you're a woman, that's fine. I'm safe with you. But if Justin Baldoni says something, then he's a man. That is discrimination. Is either way you look at it, whether you're it's positive discrimination if you're allowing Jenny Slate to say something because she's a woman, and it's negative discrimination if you're saying to Justin Baldoni, you can't say anything because you're a man. And men can absolutely be discriminated against. There's a misconception where people think, I mean, largely the rule is in place, absolutely, to protect women. That is true. But it is not absolute. And it's there to protect men as well. And men can be discriminated against. And this is a classic example of that. To say that, they can have a conversation in the presence of a man, and it's okay whilst the women are talking about it, but as soon as the man opens his mouth, he's a creep. There's something really wrong with that. So, my opinion is, yeah, there's discrimination, which is protected, and then you can't retaliate. Blake Lively, of all people, knows that. Okay. And in this moment, was there some kind of retaliation? I think so. I think so. I don't think everything led from this moment. I think that his fate had already been decided months before, with other things like not fawning over, Taylor Swift and asking about her weight. But, further down on that same thread, you got Jenny Slate saying, I sat down with Alex and was very open with her about all of this stuff. And then she goes on to say, his later comment and his fussy attitude, my feeling that the work is really suffering, and that as an actual feminist, I'm concerned and offended by the way he's so far off the mark. So she is now sitting down and telling Alex Sachs, the producer, I'm offended by what Justin Baldoni said. This is like, and and the other kind of similar example here is where Jenny Slate had made a comment about how she looked at Britney Spears' midriff for hours when she was in her 20s, and Justin Baldoni literally all he said was same, and they you'd swear the world was coming to an end the way they were acting. Like, oh my god, you can't say that. Why can't he say it? What's the difference between Justin Baldoni and Jenny Slate? The gender. That is it. Literally, the biological sex is the only thing that is different. So why is it not okay for Jenny Slate? Why is it not okay for Justin Baldoni to say something that Jenny Slate is saying? In the real world, it's okay. Because it's an informal conversation. Again, they're having these conversations in his presence, but expecting him to sit and shut up. If you want to have these kind of conversations and you think that they're only appropriate for women, have them alone. Have them elsewhere, out of earshot. But you don't sit there in front of a man, have a conversation, and then tell him that he's an asshole because he makes a comment or because he participates. So for me, discrimination is there. Okay, so we have rule 7. So if I go back to that for a second, rule 7A is regards retaliation, discriminatory conduct. Now, to me, a lot of her conduct during the post production, in particular, whenever Baldoni tried to push back a little bit, I think she retaliated against Baldoni for refusing to issue a fake apology. I think that false apology was a big thing too. Let's just go to that actually. So this is the part in the timeline where they're talking about that. It's August the 12th. It is after the premiere. But it's this kind of threat, where the WME executives had well, they'd been they'd relayed a statement that Lively and Reynolds had drafted on behalf of Baldoni, Heath, and Wayfarer, wanting them to take accountability and all of this other stuff. This is all our fault. And what would happen if they didn't release it? Well, if they clearly say here, actually. They warned WME that absent compliance, the gloves will come off. So, and we've seen those messages. We've seen Ryan Reynolds writing those messages saying, oh, well, they need to write 15-page letter of apologies. They need to do a statement. Wayfarer and Sony need to take the hit for this. It's not fair, but Blake Lively's taking the hit for it, blah, 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 blah. And very, very clearly not accepting that, the marketing, the piss poor marketing was maximum efforts own doing. Like, if anyone smeared Blake Lively, it was maximum effort. They did a terrible, terrible job because that's what people were, unhappy about. So we have retaliation, and obviously, like I say, this is still all going. This is still they're in their acting capacity. They are still representing this film, so these union rules still apply at this point. And the rules are very clear that there is to be no retaliation. Um, let's have a look. And although it says violence, right, again, not limited to, but threats and intimidation are in Rule 7B are also prohibited. You can't do that. And by saying that, if you don't do this, the gloves will come off. By putting pressure on to issue a false apology, um, and kind of coercive demands which were being relayed through Sony, then I believe that there is a violation of Rule 7B. So, do I think that there have been violations? Yes, I do. SAG-AFTRA are not probably not going to do too much about it. I don't entirely know, and again, as with all the other guilds, I don't know if Wayfarer wants to do anything. But there are definitely rules in place, and again, like every other guild, they have been breached. That is now all for the guilds in total, that between Lively and Reynolds, there are rules that have been violated with this one film alone. And it's quite shocking. They do not live to any rules or anyone's standards at all. They just apply their own. It's absolutely nuts. Just one side thing. Again, I don't know because we don't have enough information. But here, Rule 8, no union member shall drive any studio equipment to location. Now, as with most rules, right, that would probably include other forms of transport. Although it says drive, right, it not necessarily, not, it probably wouldn't literally be just limited to a car that is driven by that union member. It would be other things. And I wonder the question a little bit, did Blake Lively breach this rule by taking that hard drive with the film to Texas? Is a hard drive that contains, shot footage of the film that has been put together, does that count as studio equipment? I don't have enough yet. It would sound like it is part of studio equipment. But yeah, I don't know. It's something that caught my eye and made me wonder, is there a possibility? Again, it's not overly important. I think the discrimination and all the bullying is more important here because that is specifically Justin Baldoni's rights being discriminated against, and not just by Blake Lively either. If we go back to the text messages between her and Jenny Slate is also a member of SAG-AFTRA and also subject to membership rules against harassment and, bullying and discrimination. So, yeah, that's where we are. Again, also Brandon Sklenar. I think those are the three main ones I find to be problematic. Isabella Ferrer's conduct, I mean, she was complimentary for the most part. I haven't seen any evidence of, discrimination, particularly, or any harassment or bullying from her. I think she's been, an entitled diva through this lawsuit process. Absolutely. But we are now, this is a separate kind of and distinct matter. We're now in the midst of a lawsuit. But at the time when Justin Baldoni was trying to actively fulfill his job role as an actor, I have not seen any evidence of Isabella Ferrer participating in any kind of harassing or bullying or intimidation tactics. But I do see some stuff, very limited with Brandon Sklenar, but I do see quite a bit with Jenny Slate and definitely with Blake Lively. So I hope that's all helpful, and I will do the video with bringing all three of it together.